In November, the government announced dates to end the sale of cars and vans with engines by 2030 and require the sale of zero-emission vehicles by 2035. But recently, the influential Public Accounts Committee has issued a critical report highlighting the lack of progress in terms of delivering the targets. Skeptics, of course, say that the target is far too ambitious and have naturally jumped at the opportunity to say it should be delayed. So what I intend to do in the next 15 minutes is to outline to you what an effective delivery plan really is to end the sale of cars with engines, and to, I hope, show you that it really is possible to do in the next 15 years. Firstly, a few words about me and Transport and Environment. T&E is Europe's biggest green NGO working on transport. It now has around 70 staff. It's based in Brussels, but it has 6 national offices around the UK, and I'm the UK director. I've worked at Transport and Environment for nearly 9 years. Before that, I ran the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, now Zemo Partnership, in the UK. And before coming back to the UK, I ran T&E's Clean Vehicles programme. Now, unlike cars within the EU single market, including Norway, the UK can ban the sale of ICE cars from 2030. But at present, the government hasn't done this. It's only announced a phase-out date. So what we now need to do is to move forward with a really clear delivery plan. Now, the fundamentals are already in place. We have a charging network which is growing across the UK, and we have one charger for about every 20 electric cars on the road, perfectly adequate for the number of vehicles we have now. National Grid have made clear that there's no overarching barriers in terms of the electricity grids, and sales of electric vehicles are now over 10% of the new car market. And by 2025, vehicle manufacturers have already committed to make around 1/5 of their cars zero emission. So the fundamentals of making the transition are now there. But what we need to do is to put in place the plan that will get us to the final stage. And from T&E's perspective, there are really 5 key elements of what are needed to be included in that plan. At the centre of it are, of course, measures to both drive supply and demand for electric vehicles. Just providing carrots for consumers to buy electric vehicles will be very expensive and ultimately probably unsuccessful, as it's unlikely to be matched by an equivalent increase in supply from manufacturers. But equally true, just regulating the car industry is likely to lead to a shortage of demand for the vehicles and therefore a failure to meet the goals. So we need affordable incentives alongside regulations requiring the car industry to sell more EVs. Alongside that, it's really important that we develop a world-class charging infrastructure, and we support vehicle manufacturers to make the transition from making conventional vehicles in the UK to actually shifting to zero-emission vehicles. And here, of course, it's really crucial that we develop the gigafactories that will be supplying the batteries in the next few years. The discussions at Ellesmere Port have really highlighted how crucial it is to make sure that we have strong incentives to encourage the shift to electric vehicles and manufacturers to build them. At the time of the Brexit discussions, it was made very clear that there was a dividend to come from a move out of Europe and savings to be had. We now need to see some of those savings reinvested in car manufacturing in the UK to enable us to make sure we're buying those vehicles. At the heart of the phase-out plan, there must be effective regulation of the car industry. A voluntary approach will fail, as it did in the 2000s. A zero-emission vehicle sales target is needed, requiring car makers to progressively increase the number of zero-emission vehicles that they are selling each year, until the 100% goal is reached in 2035. Building on the lessons from the EU car CO2 rules, the new regulations should commence in 2024 and set interim targets rising every 3 years. The scheme would require individual brands to meet a percentage of sales of zero-emission vehicles each year, and to reduce costs, they would be able to buy and sell credits between different manufacturers should they wish to. For companies with a very small market share, there could be a derogation on the regulation until 2030. To ensure companies treat their targets seriously, then there should be penalties to ensure they meet their goals. For a 2035 phase out, we need sales of zero emission vehicles to reach around 17% in 2024, rising to 35% in 2027 and 61% in 2030. The current UK CO2 regulations will only require about 13% sales of battery electric vehicles by 2025, and therefore fall well short of what is needed. Regulating the car industry is a stick, but we also require carrots to encourage consumers to buy those vehicles. Now, throwing money at car buyers through ever bigger grants and lower VAT rates isn't affordable and will worsen the subsidy dependency that's already beginning to develop with electric cars. The plug-in car grant bill is likely to approach £1 billion this year, similar to the total amount that's been spent to date. But if grants end without appropriate tax breaks being put in place, then there's likely to stall the market. So the Treasury needs to reform car taxation in the UK, and in the process of phasing out the plug-in car grant, create new tax incentives to encourage people to buy battery electric cars. As we can see on this slide, in new analysis that's been undertaken by Bloomberg New Energy Finance for T&E, we anyway expect price parity to be met between battery electric vehicles and conventional cars between about 2025 and 2027, depending on the segment of the market. So it will be possible to ensure that electric vehicles in the future are just as cheap as conventional cars. The incentive to shift the taxation system will ensure that we can really encourage consumers to buy more electric cars in the future. Of course, alongside incentives, we also need a high quality, comprehensive charging network. Now, the recent research undertaken by T&E highlights that in fact EV drivers think that the charging network in the UK is very much better than non-users of that network. And we also found that it really isn't necessary to have a curbside charger outside every home without off-street parking. In fact, half the drivers in the UK use their cars so little that they will actually only need to charge a top-up charge once or twice a week. And less than 5% of all cars need charging every couple of days. Approaching 2/3 of the cars in the UK are parked off street anyway, and so these cars will be very rarely using the public charging network. Now, our analysis shows that in fact we probably have enough chargers in the UK for the number of cars on the road at the present time, but these are not distributed evenly around the UK, and this is a real barrier to the rollout of charging infrastructure. And much of the poor perception of UK charging comes from the fact that there are some parts of the UK with really excellent coverage and other parts of the UK where there are clear charging deserts. And on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the regions where the regional progress in terms of the rollout of charging infrastructure and how many chargers are currently in place compared to the number that we think will be needed by 2025. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see a tool that T&E has developed to actually highlight the progress being made with charging for electric vehicles in every local authority of the UK. Between now and 2025, we need to see a levelling up to make sure that there's an adequate charging network in every part and every authority of the UK. After 2025, there needs to be a rapid acceleration of the number of charge points which are installed around the UK, with approximately double the number being installed that are currently going in around the country. T&E's view is that in particular we need to increase the number of charge points in car parks at destinations, whether that be workplaces or town centres or supermarkets. And in doing this, people will be able to routinely charge their cars as they go about their daily business. These charge points can be complemented by rapid charging hubs in urban areas, particularly useful for vans and taxi drivers, and of course rapid chargers along the trunk road network. Now, one of the key debates to be had at the present time is the role of plug-in hybrids in the transition. Now, there's now overwhelming evidence to show that plug-in hybrids are only marginally better than the conventional vehicles which they're replacing, and have much higher emissions overall than an equivalent battery electric vehicle. And this is illustrated on the right-hand side of this slide, which compares the well-to-wheel emissions for different powertrains over their lifetime. Now, plug-in hybrids are also widely bought as company cars, and these are particularly unsuited for their application because they tend to be driven for much longer distances, and therefore the car isn't driving a high proportion of its time on its battery. T&E believes that no hybrid cars should be sold after 2030, and only plug-in hybrids which meet really strict criteria, which are laid down on the left-hand side of this slide, should be considered for sale after that date. In addition, the Treasury really needs to begin to collect information about the way in which plug-in hybrids are being used for company cars, and to require drivers to plug them in if they wish to receive the tax breaks. In conclusion, we now need a good delivery plan to phase out cars with engines by 2035. The plan needs to include reform of vehicle taxation, to replace the unaffordable plug-in car grant with a French-style, perhaps bonus-malus taxation approach. And it also needs to encourage the fleet and leasing sector to rapidly shift to zero-emission vehicles. We do need to strengthen our charging network in the UK, but T&E's work shows that this is achievable. We do not need huge numbers of chargers installed everywhere in the UK if we install a good number of fast and rapid chargers in key locations where they can be readily accessed by EV drivers, particularly those that don't have off-street parking. And in particular, we need to regulate the car industry to ensure that there are enough EVs coming to market and that those are being sold in the coming years, with an increasing share of zero-emission vehicles being targeted from 2024 onwards. It is possible to achieve a phase out of ICE engines by 2035. Now what we have to do is to see policy develop to make sure that it really happens.